Hello YouTube, welcome to Diablo 3, and today I'm going to be showing you a Demon Hunter build here on the current PTR as part of patch 2.6.1, and this is probably going to be one of the strongest Demon Hunter, if not one of the strongest builds in the upcoming patch, so hopefully you'll enjoy this. Let me know in the comment section if you're going to be playing Demon Hunter in Season 12, and stay tuned for today's show. Okay then, so this is based on a build that I found on D3 Planner by Riker, I believe, except his is a cold base build and this is going to be a lightning base build. Apart from that though, things are going to be very similar. You should be able to, with decent gear, easily push past Greater Rift 100 solo with this build, possibly around 110 and even higher. That said, my gear at the moment is pretty bad. I've only actually got 3 particular items that are ancient, one of which is the weapon, but none of the ancients are absolutely fantastic by any stretch of the imagination. And that's the good thing about this build. It's a great starter build as well as a great build for pushing into the very, very high rifts once you do get good gear. And the reason for that is that it's very, very easy to get an ancient weapon, and that's because the Carly's point weapon which you're using is just one of 2 daggers available to the Demon Hunter, meaning you can easily craft a bunch of rares at the blacksmith, and then over at the cube here you can go ahead and upgrade the rare item to the legendary, and you've got a good chance then of getting the ancients. I think it took me about 6 rares to craft to get this particular ancient, not very long at all. So that's the weapon that you want. You want to increase attack speed and plus damage, of course, and ideally you want to socket it with the Ramalana's gift or whatever that item is, and that will give you a nice damage boost. And then obviously on top of that you're going to need the 6-piece Shadow set. This is because of the set bonuses which are going to be integral to this particular build. Most of these I believe are buffed as well as part of this particular patch. Yes, I've just checked, and Impale has been buffed by 10,000% on the 6 set bonus. It used to be 40,000% increase, now it's 50. And on top of that, the Carly's point has also been buffed. It used to go from 60 to 80% on Impale damage. It can now go from 225 to 300% extra damage. So some nice buffs there for the Shadow set and this particular build. The actual build itself is going to be very similar to what we've used in previous seasons. We're just going to be dishing out more damage. So other items you're going to want to use: the Convention of Elements, which is going to buff your elemental damage. Obviously in this case the lightning element is what we'll be looking for, so that's going to be useful especially on the Rift Guardian, since we're not going to be using the Bane of the Stricken gem with this build. Instead we're going to be using the Pain Enhancer due to just the flat out extra damage and attack speed that that's going to give us, but mostly the attack speed. The damage is actually quite negligible. And just while I'm talking about gems, you're also going to want to use Gurgle of Swiftness, not only for the attack speed increase, but also for the cooldown reduction. That's going to help with our Vengeance, which I'll talk about later. And on top of that then, finally, you're going to want to use Bane of the Trapped, and that basically is for the huge damage buff that that gem gives you. For your other gems, you're going to want cooldown reduction in your helm, so a diamond, and then depending on how much damage you're taking and how high you're pushing, you're going to want to either switch between the green gems and the white gems in your armour, and of course a green gem in your weapon as well. I'm using Traveller's Pledge and Compass Rose for the set bonuses in terms of one of our rings and also our necklace, and then you're going to want to use the Strong Arm Bracers for the damage increase that they give, and then for your belt you're going to want to use Chain of Shadows. Very, very good belt for this build. And finally, the Holy Point shot for your Impale synergy is going to be your offhand quiver of choice. Again, even with this bad gear, we pretty much thrashed through this Greater Rift that's level 83, which happens to be the highest I could join at the time. I don't even put much thought into it, to be honest, and we have plenty of time left at the end, so we should easily be able to get into the 90s even with terrible gear, quite frankly. As I say, because it is easy to get an ancient weapon, then that's obviously going to help a lot. In terms of the cube, you're going to want the Dawn in the weapon slot. That's very, very important because you do need Vengeance up 100% of the time. And Aquila Curious is what we're using in our armor slot, just for the flat out damage reduction. You could also put in the one that, if I can just find it here, I forget what it's called, Visage of Goons, that's it for the Dark Art Rune for Vengeance. You can then put Seath on your Vengeance, but that's mostly if you are lacking in resource regeneration. You're not going to be with this build, quite frankly, so the Aquila Curious is definitely the item that you're going to want to use. And then finally, the Elusive Ring. The damage reduction is very, very important, and you are going to be vaulting around all over the place anyway, and casting Shadow Power, so just keep that buff up at all times. It only lasts 8 seconds, but that's plenty of time to recast things when need be. Skills next then, of course, and Impale is going to be our main source of damage, no surprise with that. I'm going to be using the Ricochet rune, which does 2 other knives every time you cast Impale, and that's the lightning rune, so we're going to be going for plus lightning damage on our gear where possible. I will have a look at the stats on gear in a moment as well. If you're going for the cold version of this build, then over penetration is going to be your rune of choice, and this is actually a powerful rune because even though you only get the 1 knife being thrown each time, it does pierce through enemies. So when you're really pushing for high greater rifts and you've got a lot of enemies that are taking a while to kill, then over penetration is probably going to be hitting more enemies than Ricochet. Companion, I'm going to be going for Boar Companion. That's just basically for the damage reduction buff that we'll be getting from that. Vault, very important ability, and I'm going to be using Rattling Roll. Shadow Power, doesn't matter what rune you select because the 4-piece set bonus of our set gives us access to all the runes anyhow. Next up we have Fan of Knives, Bladed Armour. Don't care about the damage from Fan of Knives, it's the damage reduction, plus that's going to synergise with our Numbing Traps passive skill. And finally, we have Vengeance, which is a flat 40% increase in damage and a flat 50% reduction in damage that we're going to be taking when we use the Dark Heart rune. So Vengeance does have a 90-second cooldown and lasts for 20 seconds, but we've gone for a ton of damage reduction, so we do have the ability to keep that up 100% of the time. And in terms of passives, we're going to be using Awareness. You'll be triggering this quite regularly, especially in your higher greater rifts, and obviously that's just going to stop you from dying. Call the Weak, that's important because most of our enemies, in fact all the enemies, are going to be affected by this, so it's just basically a flat 20% damage increase. Ambush, also a very nice damage increase, which is going to be happening a quarter of the time. And then finally, Numbing Traps, which is a damage reduction, again with Bane of the Trapped and with Fan of Knives. This is going to be active on virtually every enemy we come across. So that's the skills, and again, I do need to optimise my gear a little bit more. I'm not going to worry about that right now for the purposes of this video, but you want to go for cooldown reduction. So anything that you can put that on would be helpful. You want to make sure, as I say, to keep 100% uptime on your Vengeance, and you also want to go for lightning damage. If you were going for the cold version of this build, then obviously plus cold damage is going to be what you'd be choosing instead. I mean, this Holy Point shot is quite terrible, really, but it just shows, as I say, the powerful nature of this particular build, that even with completely suboptimal gear, we can push some quite high greater rifts. Just before we finish then, guys, I want to show you that with a few tweaks you can actually turn this build into a speed farming build as well. Once again, my gear isn't optimised, but even so, one of the great things about this build is even with suboptimal gear, it will still do the job for you. So the few changes I've made will take us through Torment 13 very, very quickly. We'll be able to get millions in gold streaks, we'll get lots and lots of death breaths, and of course everything else that comes with Torment 13 farming. So these are the few changes that you'll want to make. By the way, I should point out that this is really one of the prime reasons for choosing lightning over cold for this build. You can easily switch between greater rift pushing and farming. The cold version is not made for farming in any way, shape or form. It just won't work, but obviously the lightning does. So these are the item changes you'll need to make. You'll want to change your belt for the gold wrap, and you'll want to change one of the ring slot out of your cube actually to the avarice band. That will increase the radius at which you're going to pick gold up. You're going to want to get rid of the blood frenzy gem and replace that with the boon of the hoarder gem for the extra gold drops. And with those items combined, you're going to get a lot of armor and of course a lot of gold and a lot of movement speed increase as well. I would replace your boar companion with the ferret companion. And also you're going to probably want to replace your strong arm bracers with the Nemesis bracers so that you can get extra elite packs. Elite pack hunting is going to be the order of the day when you're going for speed farming through Torment 13. It is when you're going through Greater Rift pushing as well, but perhaps even more so when you're speed farming. For your convenience, here's a quick snapshot of the skills I'm using in terms of speed farming. There's just been a few changes. In particular, note the passives. Blood Vengeance is particularly important here for resource generation, since you're going to need that on speed farming, which you won't need, of course, when enemies are taking longer to kill on Greater Rift pushing. Also, it's not as important to have damage reduction, so don't be too concerned about some of those skill changes there, where that is otherwise going to be an issue. But I'm going to finish things off here for today then, folks. I'll let the Rift play out to the end. Thanks for stopping by. If you've enjoyed watching, don't forget to leave a like, and come back soon perhaps for more Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls content. Goodbye.
Your fear betrays you.
The Rift Guardian has arrived.
Your fear betrays you. Not ready yet. I am returning to town.